I missed you yesterday.
I'm sorry.
I said I missed you yesterday. You were all celebrating Memorial Day.
Oh, right. Yeah. You didn't get the email?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Oh,
I actually watched something else. It was actually I can never remember. It's about trauma and what have you. And they had a celebration for Memorial Day, and it was really interesting because it was about how people celebrate or remember um, those who have died in war and what have you. It was quite interesting because there were people from also from the Netherlands, how we celebrate our Remembrance Day, but also how people are celebrating now in Rwanda or in Bosnia, Srebrenica, of course, in cases of recent genocide. So it's amazing sometimes, and then hearing these really, really personal stories. And one thing that came out of it, which is maybe interesting for Charter for Compassion, is this idea now that there is a conspiracy to silence. In other words, people feel that they're not able to talk about, for example, the grandparents are not able to talk about their experiences. Um, and sometimes it's because they feel, rightly or wrongly, that they're not being heard. So there was a big discussion about how we deal with things like trauma and what have you. It was very, very interesting.
hmm. I don't know. People can join in on the conversation. I'm not sure about exactly. Um, I've not had that experience. Although, I mean, if I look at my own grandparents, I think there was a reluctance because of the war, not necessarily about talking um, about it generally, but I think specifically, yes, it's probably true. I know that my grandmother was fearful. We have family in Canada totally separated from us because of the fact she was afraid to cross the border for fear that
Mm.
she'd never be allowed to come back.
Wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, they were also talking about Dubrovnik, which quite often people just do not realize that in the 90s, Dubrovnik was also very much connected to fleeing people from, that whole area. They just forget what was going on in Dubrovnik in the 90s.
Well, it was the war.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's how I celebrated Memorial Day.
Hello, everyone. So it's just about 5 minutes after. Wow. Okay. Well, it must have been something I said the last time that people didn't return. I don't know. We'll see. See what happens. So how is everyone? Hi, Carol and Don and Anum. Bob. Bob, you have something transcending from your ceiling.
Uh, it's my roommate's girlfriend's birthday, so
Oh,
there's decorations.
okay. Yeah, quite a bit. Okay, so I'm just wondering if we might start with if there are any questions, reflections, before we jump into what I kind of have planned for today.
Am I now unmuted, Marilyn?
I think you are, Carol. I'm guessing that that's who's speaking because I don't see your face now.
Oh, now my face is gone, but
Okay.
oh, I'm sorry. I remain very inept here. I did want to just ask, you had referred to some homework.
Yeah, we did send an email to everyone. I hope you all got it.
The one with the 4 phases, etc.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
there were some links there for you,
Mhm.
to consider. Um,
In the toolbox.
yeah. Okay. So if people don't have any questions or reflections or anything, what was that? with someone. Okay. Okay, let me start and I'll share my screen. And hopefully this will work. I gave it a try last night. I wanted to start out with it's really weird. There's sound, but I don't. Okay, so I want to start out with just this very brief animation that we did a few years ago, and I think that it might prompt a little bit of discussion, and then move on to making a transition from thinking that you want to maybe be involved in creating a compassionate community wherever that might be, and with any physical place or within an organization, to really committing to doing it. So let's start here.
Over the past 10 years, the Charter for Compassion has grown to become the largest network in the global compassionate movement. We have a bold, audacious vision for the next 10 years, where compassion in action is the path to a world that is peaceful, joyful, and works for all life. We invite you to join the movement and co-create this vision with us. Faced with pervasive, serious crises everywhere, people are awakening and seeking a more harmonious and compassionate world, but without a structure to connect to others, grow strong, and take charge of transforming our planet, many are unsure how to proceed. That's where the Charter excels. The Charter for Compassion offers a global structure so that people, organizations, and cities can become visible to each other and make critical connections. These connections happen at several levels. The Charter connects individuals to cutting-edge courses that cultivate empathy and core human values. The Charter connects schools to compassionate learning programs that hundreds of schools and universities are using. Because of the Charter's connections, 22,000 preschoolers in Monterrey, Mexico, are learning about compassion, kindness, and empathy through Think Equal lessons. But the Charter is also helping to spread Think Equal in social, emotional, and ethical learning in other countries. The Charter connects cities to other cities that have pledged to focus on open dialogue, understanding, and inclusion. More than 400 communities in 54 countries want to increase compassion locally, and people at the grassroots level are working on innovative initiatives that address local needs. Let's look at a few examples. Compassionate Pune in India is connecting local farmers growing organic produce to markets that pay them a fair price. Compassionate Pakistan is creating women empowerment zones for skill building. In Belfast, Northern Ireland, volunteers are hosting compassionate cafes to heal political and religious divides. In San Pedro, Mexico, Las Madrinas, the godmothers, are rebuilding lives one roof at a time. In Las Vegas, Nevada, and 13 other states, 160,000 students are learning science, nutrition, and conservation in hands-on school gardens supported by Green Our Planet and community partners. In our role as a global connector, the Charter brings together thousands of partners, supporting organizations and people worldwide, so we can learn from each other, share best practices, and co-create solutions for the peaceful and compassionate world that we all desire. The Charter for Compassion is sparking a global movement and becoming a powerful engine for planetary transformation. Join us. Compassion is an urgent call to action. Investing in compassion is investing in a better future for ourselves and our next generations. At this critical time in humanity's evolution, please support the Charter's global movement to co-create a world that works for everyone.
Okay, it did work. Amazing. So I thought that I would just kind of share that for one reason, and that is that usually most compassionate initiatives focus on 1 to 3 issues locally. I mean, there have been more ambitious projects, and I'm almost saying probably in St. Augustine, Nancy, you have more than 3 issues that you're dealing with. But for the most part, what you just saw were compassion initiatives, with the exception of an organization, like for example, like Green the Earth Planet, which is a partner from Las Vegas, but is really very much involved with Las Vegas itself. So we can have compassionate initiatives within organizations and organizations that are connected to compassionate communities. But you know, one of the things I think in the link that I shared through the email the other day is that there are 21 issues that if we pull together all the compassionate communities, which are now well over 550, if we pulled all of their efforts together, there are 21 issue areas that are being dealt with. And those 21 issues, some of them you've just seen. But if I think of like the very first one, a community that understands and works with an aged population, that would be London, Ontario, Canada. They were the first to really look into that and to say, okay, this is our focus. We have a more senior-oriented community, and we want to make certain that our issue that we deal with as a compassionate community is to deal with age, and to make certain that we have programs for aged, that we know how to help an aging population. And so there are some communities, especially we have a couple retirement homes that are compassionate initiatives, and therefore their focus is really dealing with that issue. If we look at Karachi, you know, they have 3 major, well, actually 4. They have 4 issues, but Karachi has been doing this work now for the life of the charter. They were one of the very first communities that began to deal with compassion. And their very first one was in education. And it continues to be one of their highest priorities, to bring compassion into education, to bring transparency into education, and really to try and give hope to young people, so that as they live in a really marginal society in many cases, with terrorism surrounding them, that they are really committed to working on education. The other thing that they're committed to working on is women empowerment issues, so that allowing women to seek a profession and really support them in pursuing a profession. The other thing very early was that they wanted to promote games. And that they brought compassion to gamesmanship, so that with cricket and other forms of play, that they introduced that. The Netherlands, ironically, I just saw Morgana's face, is that in the Netherlands, one of the very first things that the Netherlands did was to create a compassion award. And the first award went to a person who was playing football, soccer, so in gamesmanship. And so, you know, it's a matter of really kind of focusing in on what you see. And I just wanted to make one other observation from that video that you just saw. In Belfast, and this has been true. Again, Belfast was a compassionate community very early on, and as you know, at the time, especially when the compassion movement started in Belfast, was still very much divided, which it is now. And some neighborhoods in Belfast still have lockdown at 6 o'clock, where people are expected to stay within their own territory. And so the big thing that Compassionate Belfast did was to sponsor cafes, conversational cafes across the city, so that people could easily, with purpose, cross city lines and get together and just actually talk about the issues in which they were living. So I'm just going to stop there and see if there's any reaction to what you just saw or any questions. Did it generate any questions at all?
I guess my question, Marilyn, would be, is the list of the 21 issues embedded in one of those links that you sent us? Because I don't remember seeing it, but I didn't get to everything.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, good.
And you can click on any one of those issues. And one of the things that we did was we cross-referenced the Sustainable Development Goals, the World Health Organization goals, and a couple other documents, so that we tried to list all of the questions that needed to be answered, or at least considered. And obviously we might have overlooked a lot of things, but we had a large number of people who worked on those issues. We did this for about 9-10 months online, and people contributed to asking these questions to try and help one another to consider, okay, here you are, you're going to be dealing with youth and violence. So what are the questions that need to be asked around that topic? Or, the environmental racism. What are the kinds of questions that need to be answered if that is your focus? So that you don't have to do a lot of research. At least we have scratched the surface, and in encouraging you to go deeper to do the exploration about some of these issues. But it goes all the way back to beginning to understand what are. I'm just going to. I see that my computer here is losing juice as we're talking. That you need to delve deeply into those issues that really are affecting your community. And so if food scarcity is one of those issues, then obviously that's the first step that you want to do. But the next step is, who's working on that issue already? And so, is there anyone that's doing it? In many cases, there are.
That's part of the reason that I asked at our board meeting, our Compassionate St. Augustine board meeting. One of our members is working with the local youth academy and doing a lot of work with educating families about healthy family experiences, co-creating, things like that. One of the areas that he's identified and concerned about is families who have a family member with a disability, and looking for resources that might help them form some kind of programs that would provide respite for the caretakers, and also perhaps opportunities for those family members with disabilities to kind of create community. And that would be a good resource then, Marilyn, for us there?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Okay.
The reason for that would be that these are the questions that we have posed that need to be answered. Now, however, if you're going to try and find an organization that's already doing something similar to what you want to do, you have to really concentrate locally on what that might be. Does it mean that you go to the local business association? Does it mean that you go to local government who might actually know about programs like this? And in fact, worldwide, some local governments really do sponsor specific programs. They might be marginalized programs, or they might actually be programs that are integral to local government. So you do have to do a lot of work to find those organizations. And in some cases, and I think I might have mentioned this last week, a compassionate community might say, okay, we know that food scarcity is a big issue here, and therefore, we don't want to reconstruct the wheel. It's already been discovered. And so who's out there that maybe needs some help, who's working in this specific area?
Mhm.
And then always think, I always think to my third grade teacher, Miss Burton, who taught us long division. And, you always want to get to the lowest common denominator. And
Mm.
that, what's the cause of the issue that you're working with? Is it a cause like in Pakistan? Think about, what would it take to empower women to start their own businesses? Um, yeah, they would need skills, definitely. Those skills would be varied from the trade that perhaps they wanted to promote, but it's probably more than that. And if they were going to be successful in what they were doing, they would need some organizational development around creating an organization. But then let's get deeper into the question. Why is it that women do not have the capability? They have the capability, but why is it that they might not be allowed to create these businesses? What's stopping them? What's the hindrances here? So you have to keep going back and back and back to get to the point of discovering things. Or like in the case of Bob, who's helping to create the Camino, that's that road of highway of, potentially pulling compassionate communities together. But before you can pull them together, they have to understand what is a compassionate community. And if maybe it's only one issue in that community, maybe that issue is that they're so concerned about the very fact that young people are leaving their village or their town, and they want to keep those young people there. What would it take? Would it take an extension of an educational program from a regional university or community college or whatever it might be? So it's really deep diving into trying to find the answers. But there's a lot of questions that need to be explored before you can get to the answers. Anyone else before we kind of journey onward? Bob, you look so pensive.
I'm looking at something on my computer. I'm like doodling. I think the thing that I'm holding the most right now that is something we can talk about, but is like spoilers, like those that aren't compassionate. And if I use like the case of Brownsville and Laredo, which we're learning more about on this Camino, there's like a huge tension point that's between like the activist, environmentalist, grassroots community, and then that of the business and government community per se. And so right now they have a lot of issues around the border, and that becomes a stress point between those that are being targeted and are victims of the border, of an uncompassionate project, and then those who are actually paid by the project to uphold the violent project. And so somebody was telling me like everybody has a family member that's like works for the border patrol or for that violent system that's being uncompassionate. So the uncompassionate system is rooted, or like it's rooted in like the community in its economic system. And then the second one is around the environmental issues right now. If people have been following the Starbase that Elon Musk is building in the Gulf, and then you see this liquefied natural gas that's being brought from Laredo to the Gulf, and this nearshoring, which is trying to use like precious water and land points to just do junk just to sell things. That's not compassionate. And so there's this like huge distress and tension. And so for me, it's always like, yeah, we'll just get all these people in a room together. Like that's my starting point. But then after like 4 conversations, I was just like, wait, what? Who's on whose side? And where's the compassion? And it just became very like, and so maybe that's my pensive face that I've been expressing this morning.
So where do you start with that? Here, you have a lot of brains here. They say the collective brain is good.
Are you asking? Is that a rhetorical ask, or you
Yeah, I'm just asking others, where would they start? If this was your community, where would you start with that?
I mean, I think the first step, or like where we are in that project, is getting at least the like-minded people, like the people that I connect with that I feel are oozing with compassion, like those at the like Radical Library and those in the Environmental Coalition and those working as organizers in the effort to make immigration more compassionate. And just asking like who are their friends, like can we have another meeting next week, and instead of it being a one-on-one, can it be a three-on-one, and can we like build from a core? I think the only thing that's like hard and that I try to play as like a peace builder is that I am more willing to compromise. I'm more willing to communicate with people that are in disagreement. Like if because one, I don't live there, but two, that's just kind of like my positionality as a white male is that I can try to at least go and talk to the mayor, maybe not show my full hand of like you suck. Why are you destroying the environment? But at least trying to like kind of just hear what words they're using, at least understand, not an agreement, but understand just like where they're coming from. I think that'd be my next two steps, like build my base and then at least try to like do some like research and communication exploration, just to understand the relationships a little bit better.
Yeah, it's almost like it's a little bit like coalition building, isn't it? Because we assume that everyone's perspective, who might be for the environment, for example, are on the same page, but most probably they might not be. And so, how do you build a coalition of those like-minded people or those, compassionate-minded people? How do you go about doing that? Might certainly be one step.
I mean, I guess I think the other thing that's tough, or like I'm organizing events in relation to Israel Palestine right now. And if I have one of the co-sponsors is a liberal Zionist group or a liberal group that believes in the state of Israel, I'm going to instantly lose some groups to the left or the groups that are more focused on Palestine. If I put out anything in Laredo with Mayor Cowan, whatever the guy's name is, or Mayor of Brownsville on a come to this Charter for Compassion event featuring this mayor, there are the people to the environmentalists or the activists to the left, they won't come. And so even when you try to build that coalition, I guess it's just with such sensitivity and like care of like when you have to just like the order in which you bring groups in or build that relationship or that trust like has to be sequenced.
Yeah, and it's almost like trying a lot of different things. Let me give you an example. In Pomona, California, one of the things that they did was they really got involved. The Compassion Coalition group got involved in the Thursday night program. Do people know this? It's kind of a police night out where people gather and they feel, supposedly the intent is to feel safe, that this is just an exchange where the police come out and different organizations come out and they get to know one another, and who could be against a safe gathering of people. So they chose to do that. That it was just a night of fun, a night of safety, and a night of almost like, this sounds very trite, but a meet and greet kind of thing. So, how can you take something that is, you can't really dispute, and make it to your advantage of getting people to meet one another? So that was just one thing there.
But those National Police Nights Outs were very controversial because it actually scared a lot of people. Like they didn't feel safe with the police. And so now all of a sudden you have like police playing soccer or doing fireworks or playing in a band, and like one, that's not their job. Two, that just scares people. Like people are terrified to be around police in communities that I've worked with.
Yeah,
And so again, like that those events were like good on one end, but it also had like this repercussion.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your community. In the case of Pomona, I don't think it was so much of being terrified. I could be wrong, but it has met with great success over the years. And it's almost become like a festival. I can see in some places where that just would not happen.
But people aren't looking for like a festival. We're looking for an end of police brutality. And so I guess like in these like Laredo or Brownsville, we could create events that promote compassion, but does it stop the liquefied natural gas? Does it stop like the billionaire takeover? Like that's where it's like I struggle as an organizer, compassion, and then like an activist and like going direct, because there is like there's an organizer aspect of me that sees the value in the national night out for safety. Like what's wrong with that? And then there's like the activists that it's like, don't do that. That's propaganda and that distracts from actually the issue we're trying to address.
Yeah, Bob, I would say that you have too many issues on the table. I could be wrong, but one of the things about deciding on as a compassionate initiative, it's going to grow. But I think if you can focus in on one area, so is that area the environmental issue, and if it is the environmental issue, does that become more segmented with other issues that you can flush out from that? This reminds me of our dear friend Magdalena Woolery in Botswana. I mean, she had an incredible difficulty. I mean, when I said, what are the issues that you're dealing with, it went on forever. Well, you can't start out with going on forever with the issues. You need to have some areas of success, and you need to eventually you need to build coalitions in each of those areas, so that the person who's dealing with indigenous rights in Botswana and that small group of people is different from the group of people that was trying to locate land to build a house for young people to get them off the streets. Or the fact that I could go on in terms of their 12, because they wound up with 12 issues, but that had to develop over time. They had to to start out to find some unification in what they were doing and some success, some moments of success. But please, I think that a real important part of all of this is recognition of groups that are already working, and celebration, and bringing some togetherness and some joy into the equation. I don't know if that's helpful. I don't know. Do other people here have ideas for Bob? I mean, some cases, the success of some compassionate communities is because they've only done one thing and they've done it really well. In other cases, I think, like from San Antonio's perspective, I mean, they've been doing this now for 10, 12 years, and they do have a number of issues that they're working on, and have worked to a certain degree of success, from tree projects in local elementary schools to involvement at the border. I wish that there could be a definitive answer, but there isn't. It is a give and take all the way. Okay.
I think Dawn has her hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Dawn. Go ahead, Dawn.
Well, just so that maybe everyone's feeling this, there seems to be two forces going on. In the one sense, there's a growing awareness of compassion and kindness, and lots of very positive activities going on, and social emotional learning, etc. And on the other hand, there seems to be kind of a growing callousness, and things that we worked against. Anti-racism is getting worse in some ways, and as we all know, some problems of compassion in politics. And so I guess we just have to join forces with the people who are on, that growing cult, that sort of awakened evolution of consciousness, and perhaps work also with understanding the issues of why there's so much polarization. And so I see it, there's sort of big systemic problems, and then there's little issues. I'm not little issues, but smaller, more concrete issues of that we can work with. And being a bit older, you kind of see around that. I mean, there's sometimes that changes also go forward and then they go backward, right? So I don't know if anyone has anything to say about that, but I mean, I sort of tend to want to work on both levels because I think both levels are important. But I also do see, at different ages, I mean, I think also some people are very overwhelmed by their lives, just by the cost of living, etc. And that even can bring people to what it sometimes seems like a selfishness because they're just trying to survive. And then there's the whole issue of media. I mean, I have this interesting thing. The way we make a little extra money is I rent a room because my kids aren't home anymore to the Airbnb. And I meet all sorts of people, people from very right wing, left wing. And I chat to everyone because I don't, I like to be open to learn why people's minds, what they're thinking. And it's amazing how people can believe what they want to believe. It seems that there really is this echo chamber thing that people can believe that certain things are really going well when others of us see it as really going badly. So anyway, I just think just somehow, I don't know, that's just my comments.
Well, I think a little bit of a commentary on that is that, yes, we look as if everything has been multiplied and is in a chaotic sense. And I don't know if we know the answer to that because of the very fact that media drives a lot of our ideas and our conversation, and that media becomes more pronounced every day. In fact, I remember a number of years ago, probably as many as 8 years ago, um, Jennifer James, who's a social anthropologist, I don't know how she arrived at this figure, but saying that the person now is exposed to 400 times more news than they had in the past. So when you think about how that multiplication affects us and all of the additional chaos it brings. But the other thing is that social scientists tell us that there is really there is some line within chaos that allows us to get to the bottom of things. And I think you're right, Don, that there are so many issues, and systemic issues are certainly one. And I think because of the multiplication of the knowledge that we possess or the confusion that we possess means that people feel a little more unstable than they ever have in the past. And so compassion rises to the top by people purporting that we need to have self-compassion before we can have compassion for others, and we need this education in compassion, which I think is probably very, very, very true. And it really, I think, weighs on us to figure out what is it that we want to do. And so, Bob, going back to what you were saying, what happens if you do like what I experienced in Bend, Oregon, where, this group of people, and it was a group that practiced mindfulness. And they were the ones who decided that they were going to do this compassionate community, and which is far different than any other groups that we've had. And so they decided that they were going, and I apologize because I think I might have done this story the last time, but it really is a remarkable story. And they sat down. Bend, Oregon is, probably a very middle class and to a certain extent upper middle class community in some instances. And they said, who is it that we want to invite to this meeting? And they came up with 40 some people that they wanted to invite. And it was the sheriff and the chief of police and real estate agents and bankers and people from the hospital, et cetera, et cetera. And only 3 people couldn't come to the meeting. And there was food involved, and food is always a really good thing. And just talking about compassion. They brought me in. I talked a little bit about the global movement of compassion and compassionate communities. And then we did this little exercise, and people broke into small groups of 5 people for an hour. And they tried to talk about, what are some of the issues of discomfort in our community? And ironically, I think we had 5 groups, and all 5 groups recognized the same issues. And there weren't too many of them in their case. In the case, Bob, of what you're dealing with, it sounds like there's many more. But they all, and they all decided on these issues, and they all we came back and experienced listening to each of the groups, from the police to the real estate agent to the hospital administrator to some local, the superintendent, etc. And then the question was posed, well, what are we going to do about this? And what do you do from a health perspective, a wellness perspective? What do you do from a housing perspective? And so it was interesting because it was the first time that they listened to one another. So I think it's really important to get at those issues, and for each of the groups that are involved to understand that the people really are aware of the issue from different perspectives. I don't know. Somehow there needs to be that initial exploration of the topic. I don't know. I don't want to go on unless there's I've heard from other people who have a concern around kind of exploring this and helping with one another. Go ahead, Nancy.
It's just occurring to me that it kind of comes back to these discovering the common denominators, whether it's common humanity or a common issue that we need to coalesce around. And then one of the tools that I feel like I'm on the verge of using better is now the shift to pillars rather than sectors, and correlating the issues with this specific objectives within the pillars, and they feel as if that will to me it feels as if that will allow us to see where networks can be maximized.
Wait,
So
can you explain that, just how you see what sectors are to pillars?
The sectors felt like we were challenging isolation, these human-made barriers, because we operate within a sector, where a pillar feels very much more supportive to me. So being grounded in these foundational elements, common humanity being obviously the first, and then building on other commonalities there, so that lowest common denominator that Marilyn referenced earlier feels like it will strengthen those initiatives as we go forward. So I think that will be helpful for current and future use to continue to be able to build stronger communities as a result of that. And I also feel as if that model that Marilyn mentioned earlier, these are all the problems that we have, but what's starting them? It's I first learned it in the public health model of, we have all these ambulances down at the bottom of the waterfall, but what's happening at the top that we could do something differently so we wouldn't need all the ambulances down at the bottom. So kind of expanding on that concept. Does that make sense?
So, for example, Bob, like of the pillars, like let's say social justice and integrity, that it's involved in every issue. So what's the justice factor in the world of business? What's the justice factor in holding prisoners and restorative justice? What's the ethical standard here? If we look at environmental stewardship, what is each of our responsibilities in order to sustain and protect the environment and to nurture it. So there's deep questions in each of the pillars, but it also, I think, forces our mind to consider, how is it that we use arts and gratitude to combine with environmental stewardship, with the issue of creativity, so that all of the pillars, while each one is firmly planted, they really support common humanity, and they support our total environment. I don't know if that's the answer here that that Nancy was pointing to, but let me just move on and welcome to people who've come a little bit late, and apologies because we've been moving on here a little bit. So I'd like to just continue to share. Here is some of the material that's a little summation of some of the links that were sent to you from the last meeting. And one is, the collective impact approach, which I think, Bob, you're very much involved in, and certainly Nancy with St. Augustine, that what we're looking for is that we're looking for a common agenda. And an agenda of support. So maybe the umbrella is a compassionate initiative. And under that umbrella might be that you want to bring compassionate education to a community, or that you want to deal with an issue around environment. And that might be it. However, you might eventually, move on that. But how is it that you're going to measure success? Maybe perhaps that measurement of success is bringing people together in conversation and having a willingness to listen to one another. What might be that conversation starting point, so that basically it's let's all use our sense of what's right and what's wrong here. That might be a measurement, that people begin to feel safe of expressing themselves, but that there's a curiosity. Maybe that's another thing. The issues that I'm naming here that relate to the impact or the focus are very difficult, certainly, and some of it is more quantitative versus qualitative measurement. But it's like, really staying focused on what is it that our agenda is all about, and reinforcing things. I can't underlie this enough in the importance, and that is to really look at who's doing this work right now, and applauding them, but at the same time offering assistance in doing that work. Then the other thing, obviously, continuous communication and really looking for backbone support. What is it that people in organizations, individual people, interfaith communities, school kids, how do we form the background? Who's most affected by these issues? Who's most concerned? So these are the important questions, I think, that we need to approach. And then, once we begin to have these conversations, we need to commit. And what's the initial focus? And so, we've talked about this. There might be lots of issues within a community, but you need to make a decision. How is it that you're going to put them all into play? And what are all of the questions that you need to explore? And maybe that's a reasonable starting point. I just want to stop there for a minute, so that if you can get people to agree, maybe a starting point for us is simply asking the questions that we want to have answered. And those questions are going to come from all different kinds of perspectives. And hopefully they will come from all different kinds of perspectives. Do we have the youth perspective? Do we have those people, as Don was pointing to, who are more seasoned, who have maybe perhaps a broader perspective than people who might have a more narrow perspective? Everyone's question is really important. And how is it that you begin to look at answering those questions? That might be a long process within itself. I think I mentioned that Compassionate San Antonio went for years before they got to a point where they declared themselves to be a compassionate community. It was not, an overnight thing. I actually think that it was 10 years before they, committed to saying, this is where we're going. And do they have a lot of pullback now? Yes, they do. I mean, if you have a community who says we're not going to turn away any immigrant that crosses into our territory, there's going to be a lot of resentment to that. So the compassionate community really has its work constantly right in front of its face in order to fulfill what it feels is its mission. So, asking those questions is so very, very important. I'm going to stop there and it just reminds me that Anu wrote to me and said, should we talk at the end of our meeting about Compassion 2.0? Because we want to address the very fact that, the charter has been around since 2009. And the language from 2009 to 2025, and the emphasis of where people's thoughts are and thinking, and how they are teleologically oriented to the future has changed tremendously. So therefore, we feel that it's time that the Charter 2.0, a new language, be included in the Charter. And so, we're having this campaign over the next months because our hope is that on November 12th, the very same day that the Charter was unveiled at the United Nations in 2009, that we will unveil, maybe not at the United Nations, but certainly through our own efforts, a new charter. We still have the original charter as our base, as our original document, but we want to make certain that we're not excluding anyone or any things or any concern. So we really want to broaden that. And that's the same thing that you do in a compassionate community, is that, and the only way of doing that is to ask the questions, which I hope we're doing, and gathering lots of input, and then from that input to move ahead and to say, okay, here's our action plan for the future. So that might be a way of going about creating a compassionate initiative in a community or in an organization. So we did it before the end. Any responses so far or questions? I mean, the one thing that we don't have totally are the answers. But go ahead, Nancy.
I was just going to say that it occurs to me it's important to build into that a reevaluation based on the conversation about the charter having been drafted in 2009 and the changes. So it feels as if it will be integral to our strategic plan that we'll be working on next month in St. Augustine, to ensure that there's an annual review. What have we accomplished? We want to be able to demonstrate that. We want to be able to lift up where we've made progress, but we also want to ensure that with the changing times that there will be ongoing need to evaluate and ask the questions again. So it's quite an iterative process.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Someone suggested that that we move on to Compassion 4.0. And so I did a lot of research, and we can't do that because 4.0 is almost like throwing out You honor what you started out with, but you have evolved so much that you're ready for a whole new approach to doing something. And I'm not sure. I know that we're not there. But you're absolutely right. This is an existential moment in our period of moving forward. So anything so far on collective impact? And I think you're all kind of clear, right, on, how is it that you get this collective body of people together? Not easy, but at least, you have something to start with. And I think Bob helped us remember that it's like-minded people. That's the first step. And then certainly the next step after that is once you feel really comfortable with one another and say, okay, I used to be a principal in a school in Chicago, and I used to tell the kids, God, the school would work so well without you. And so, that's the thing. You need to, you have a plan, but boy, it's nothing. It's nothing until you have all of the components of the plan. And the thing is that you have to win over, or you have to help people feel that their inclusion is very, very valued, and that door is always open for new people, new ideas, new perspectives. And also moments of surprise. You have to always plan for moments of surprise. And I can assure you that the one thing is that when you feel that you have your comfort group and you really start getting to questions that are deep and meaningful, all of a sudden you find that the perspectives vary really extensively. So, you find that discomfort is really probably a pretty good thing as you bring in new ages of people, new groups of people, new traditions, new cultures. All of that is really important in the work that you're going to do. So just exploring the questions, huge. It's very huge. And then from the questions, you begin to create a plan. And your plan should be short-term and long-term objectives. And you want to delve into what are your outcomes. So let's just think about this. And I don't want to pick on Bob. But if there's anyone else here, like what might be, as you're looking at creating an initiative, a compassionate initiative, what might be a short-term objective, just generally, almost for anyone, no matter what your focus is, of a focus on an issue, what might be a short-term objective versus a long-term objective?
I mean, short-term objective for me is just getting the lay of the land, like just understanding who is out there. And if I had to take like a little test on Laredo and Brownsville, could I pass it right now? Like, would I have a general? Because if you're going to be like the backbone or like the compassion builder, it helps to like people want to know that you kind of know some stuff about the city that you're working in or that you have some stake in the game. So I think for me right now, developing that a little bit more has been really helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But what might be once you do maybe get a group together, what might be a short-term objective in bringing that group together? Don, you have your hand up. That yellow hand goes with your yellow wall, so it makes it fades away for me. Go ahead.
On the guess it was, yeah, on the weekend. I went to, they had a downtown East, which is this very, very sad area in Vancouver. They had a writers festival, and I worked there many years.
Sorry, what kind of festival?
It was a writers festival
Right. Okay.
for creative people. But if you go down there, you see so many people just on the street and homeless, and it's not just that poor. There's this anguish that you feel of people suffering, right? And I don't know, for anyway, just after this, I had this idea that I'll just have $100, and then if somebody really asks me for money, this time I'm going to give them $20, because sometimes I think people are just have so many bad things happening and so much hopelessness that sometimes one good thing happens to them and they get a little hope. But my discussion is not about that. It was actually just after check day. So unfortunately, everybody was sitting around, and there's a lot of people with food by them and drink by them, and they didn't seem like they were needing, because everyone had just got a check, actually. And then later on the day, when I went back to my car, then so many people were just really passed out on the street. But my point is that what made me think is that when I saw some young people really crying so badly, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to talk, I wanted to chat, I wanted to talk to them. They were just suffering so much. And my point is that I want to stop. I think there's a lot being talking about homelessness and harm reduction, but I want to say, let's stop the young people, people who get so hopeless that they end up there. So my short-term goal was I have, to get people together and talk about what kinds of preventative things can we do. What can we do at 14, 15, 16, when people's life, when they start to leave school, when people start to have, to feel this hopelessness, to not be able to manage to get employment or housing, or, there's the concrete things that people need, but then there's the psychological help. But there's, I've worked with people long enough to know that to be resourceful, to be resilient, to all those things. So I guess the short-term goal was to look at who can I meet together, what are the kinds of things that we can do to be preventative. So although the people who are there need help, it's almost like, let's stop if there's a flood, right? We have to do the damage. We have to look after the damage to the flood, but let's first stop the flood. Let's stop the more and more young people getting down there. So a short-term objective was to consider what that means and what are some small groups or programs that we can do to do that.
I think your short term is your long term.
Well, what's the short term then?
I think that a short-term goal might be actually you sitting down, talking with one or two people that are troubled, and simply ask the question, how can I help? Or can I help?
But I mean, I've done that so many times. I mean, sometimes you think, oh, I'd like to bring them home. I have a spare room, but you can't just do that. That can lead to all sorts of problems, right? So I kind of worked there long enough that I know what the issues are. And I do definitely have certain people that I have helped. I just have some people I see now that are trained social workers, and they came from the streets, right? I mean, I have that follow-up with people. So I know on the individual level that one can do that, but I'm talking about how to stop the flood.
Yeah, and that how to stop the flood is the long term. And so, the responses that you get, and again, my apologies, because I might have brought this up last time, is that Compassionate Seattle's like Vancouver, overrun. That's not a fair word, but there are a lot of houseless people in the Seattle area. And so there was this big gathering of people to solve the problem. But guess what? Nobody thought to invite the people who didn't have a home. And so then the next time that they did it, and they did invite the people who were houseless, and they brought in the Red Cross, they brought in a couple other people. It was like probably an open space meeting of a couple hundred people. And that conversation went so much differently than the prior conversation. There was somebody, what is I think many communities have this newspaper that is done by the homeless, and they were there, and the responses were much different, and the actions were much different that came out of that meeting. Go ahead, Dawn.
Oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean to put my hand up, but no. Well, I think when I go down there, I go to these community meetings because it is the people in the community who are talking. So, um, so I think their input, and I think the group that I would want to get together would be the community themselves. Like there was a downtown East Adult Education Center where that's where for 10 years I met with all these people and we tried to work. Fortunately, they closed the school, right? I mean, but I think that yes, that's important is to work with the people. Yeah. And with young people, I guess it would probably be to involve families too.
Possibly, yeah, if it was possible. Medita.
Yes, I was thinking this long-term thing with in Dawn's case, and then I'll go to our case with that I'm working with Bob. But yeah, so there's that social and emotional education that we need to get to them somehow, but that takes time and the effort of being there with a certain discipline and constantly. And but I believe that is always a good starting point when we go to preventive measures is finding a social and emotional education program that we can offer these students, these communities at whatever the level is required. And there are a lot of options that we do have through the Charter for Compassion that you could try, but you probably also have your own, Dawn. I think you're well experienced in that. So whatever, I think that's a good starting point for what you're talking about for the young people, especially.
Mhm. So, a short-term goal, and Dawn, I'm not specifically saying this for the area in Vancouver in which you're concerned, but let's say, Merida just brought up social emotional learning in a school, and so that okay, so you're going to introduce a new program, and let's without debating what social emotional learning is all about, let's just say you want to bring compassion into the classroom to make it simple. Maybe one of the ways of doing that is to start out with non-competitive games. And they're lovely games where nobody's the winner, but everyone is involved. And so, and just have the game, have fun. There's a game called Pruri, which is one of my favorite games. And I love to play this game with adults. And it's amazing to see how they can let go. But then after playing something like that game, sitting down and saying, what did you feel about that? How did it make you feel that no one was a winner? And how could we do that in our classroom, or how do we do that in our family, so that you have an experience, and that experience, which is somewhat positive, and then could lead into a discussion. And then how do you feel about if we do this every now and then in our classroom, that we have an activity that really is very much like what we just experienced. And so that, what you're looking for, no matter if you're trying to introduce a new program, or you're trying to build a compassionate community, is you're looking for ownership. And ownership means, individuals not only committing to it, but really delving into it. Go ahead, Nancy, you have your hand up, I think. Up, and your microphone's off.
Thank you. I put my hand down, but forgot to turn my microphone on. I have a question about that game, Marilyn. It's not a familiar word to me. Can you spell the Pruri?
Pruri, I think it's P-U-R-E-E. There's a book. I think you'll be able to find this if you Google non-competitive games. They're lovely books where nobody's the winner. They're really another one is Local Ball. I don't know if people know Loco Ball. It's like a huge badminton, what are those things called, with the feathers that are part of it? And you do it in a circle, and you have to kind of stay in the circle, but then you have to keep the what is that thing called? Shuttlecock. The shuttlecock going back and forth, so that it doesn't drop, and that you really work in cooperation with one another. You're not trying to drive a spike, or you're not out to win, but you're really out to see how long you can keep this together. So there's lots of games like that could happen, and they're not only for kids, they're really great for adults as well, but really wonderful conversation starters. And so whatever you can do to create an activity, an exercise that would help get people to understand that cooperation is a good thing, win-win is a good thing. And it goes beyond Stephen Covey, who founded the idea of win-win in a business situation.
Well, I like that. And I also like reframing. A number of times you've said nobody's a winner. And in my heart, I believe everybody's a winner when we come to these collaborative kind of initiatives. So I feel like that's exciting. And I also think that there are good tools that are now emerging that can show us our progress. And I feel like that's a very positive thing when we can say, look where we've come. We started at this baseline, and through our efforts, through our collaborations, and there's a compassionate word that you've shared a few times recently, like what is it?
Co-opetition?
Yes, co-opetition. I think introducing that in healthy ways can really go toward actually realizing the desired outcomes of being able to not feel threatened by someone better or more skilled or more educated or whatever the case may be, but to recognize that everybody's got their different contributions to make, and there's tremendous value in that.
Another good thing to think about is working backwards as an activity. The year is 2035. That's not too too much in the future, but it's 2035, just 10 years from now. And if this was such a wonderful place in which to live, or such an incredible organization in which to serve within, what would it look like? What would we be doing? How did we get here? And getting more people than just yourself involved. This compassion business is not, it might, for self-compassion, it's fine. But if you're really going to do an initiative, you have to do it with others. You need a team. So, visionary exercise is really a good place, and just think about it on the street in which you live, or the community in which you live. What would make this so much better? It might be okay now, but what would make it so much better in another 5 or 10 years? Dawn, go ahead.
Well, I guess I see that. I appreciate the games and things in education, but I see compassion is very much about social justice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the problem that I see is, for instance, that failure should not be an option, that everybody, no matter the neurodiversity or the disposition, has some skills and talents, and that nobody should leave school feeling that they're inadequate without any kind of skill or high school certificate or trade or something, so that they can find some meaningful work, right? So that means some sort of systemic change. That is what will make a big difference, more than just games, I think, is that so many people, they come out in this extremely expensive competitive society with no skill, without the high school certificate or a trade, and also feeling some sort of demeaning because they haven't been successful. And often it's the people who've had a lot of struggles from their home or from their particular disposition. and they haven't, they've in a sense been punished. I mean, I work with people who tried hard and then, you know, they had to do something that happened in their family and they couldn't get the deadline, and so they just get failed and pushed out. And so I think that with compassion really has to be systemic and working at that level too.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Don, but what I'm suggesting is how is it that you get people into the buy-in? And these, you know, they're, I want to be careful about the word game because I think that, you know, what I'm talking about here is a motivational factor that somehow you're able with others to create so that you can really get people to talk with one another. I I understand what you're saying that yeah, we really need to look at systems and do an incredible systems analysis. And then how is it? And you know, we can go on and on intellectually here, but compassion is a unification of the heart and the mind. And so, you know, how is it that we awaken both in order to get to the end product that we want? And if it means that I can get a city council to go out and play a non-competitive game so that we can have a really intense discussion because of what they experienced by doing that, I think it's worth a try. It's not going to be for everyone. I think that you bring a group of people together and you say, how are we going to really get at the heart of this issue? How is it that we're going to get people's buy-ins? And I think you'll be really surprised at, you know, what's going to happen. You'll have a lot of silence probably in the beginning, but then eventually, you know, somebody comes through with something, and then, you know, it's that person who has the courage to make a fool of themselves initially that starts a conversation and, you know, kind of recognizing, boy, thank you for taking that risk. And because usually great things happen because of that risk that somebody took. So I don't know, but we can it was certainly, you know, continue this conversation. Let's just see if I have anything else here that might be worth. So here's a biggie. And you have to be honest about this one, that as you commit to making a change, and whether that change is that you're going to bring in a new program in a school, or if you're going to try and have periodic meetings that investigates an issue that you're all concerned with. Let's say we're in Flint, Michigan. How's the water rehabilitation happening within our community? That you make a formal commitment, you make a big to-do about it, a resolution and creation of your action plan and transparency and a real effort to have a communication plan so that you know that people are really aware of what you're doing. And so we live in, I remember our former trustee, very first chair that we had of our board. She went to a compassionate city and she came back and she said, well, I talked to people who didn't know that there was a compassion movement in this city. You know, it's like, yeah, that's the truth. The world's full of a lot of people. And even if a community like some of our bigger compassionate communities are doing very well, there are lots of people who don't know about what you're doing. So it's like you really do have to have that communication plan. But as you have that plan, you have to have, you know, an effort to have additional people buy in to what you're doing constantly. This is existential. It doesn't have a beginning, and I mean, does have a beginning, but doesn't have an end. It has to keep going. And this is a lifelong commitment, and you have to be assured that it continues, not because of the Karen Armstrong, who is the founder, I didn't mean to say supposedly the founder, because it's very complicated with all the people who contributed to the charter. But, you know, I mean, she gets really irate when people say, I have compassion burnout. She would say, there is no such thing as compassion burnout. You have empathy burnout because you're not doing anything other than feeling the distress of a situation. When you are involved with compassion, it means that you're actively involved. You're pursuing something. You might get physically tired, but you are mentally alert and committed to bringing about change. And that's why you have to plan for total and complete movement and acceptance of your action plan, and you have to keep regenerating your I mean, something right now that we have to do with our lead volunteers with the Charter for Compassion. We need many more, and we need more. And the more people that you get involved, the more ideas that get stimulated, the more perspectives. I mean, I'm always kind of amazed because I think I have, put everything I could possibly put into a piece of work that I'm dealing with, and then I come to a gathering like this, and somebody comes up with a whole new perspective that I didn't even think about, even though I was pretty convinced that I looked at the issue holistically. I mean, it's amazing. People are amazing with their different perspectives, their traditions, their cultures. So that's why I think that compassion can thrive within a community, because you have all of those perspectives. And as I go around and visit compassionate communities, it's really quite amazing. I remember a number of years ago, and when I was in India, and Anam was there, obviously, because she lives there, but being taken to a community where houseless people were being rehoused in vacated trains that were no longer being used. It was their new homes. It was really interesting, community. None of these things perhaps are the total and complete answer, but sometimes they're that short-term relief that many people need. Nancy, your hand is up again.
Yes, I just wanted to go back to touch on something that you mentioned earlier, Marilyn, that I think is going to be valuable for us and could be a valuable tool for others going forward. And that is the recognition piece of it, because you speak, they're not compassion burnout, but empathy burnout. And although I feel that most of the people who are sincerely engaged in the compassionate movement, it's not about their ego. There is also something intrinsic in human nature that appreciates being recognized for our contributions. So I really feel like that's a simple thing that you just reminded me of earlier in this conversation. And now I'm envisioning, I actually, while you were just talking, kind of created a new logo that combines the head and the heart. And I feel like that could be something that would be a powerful thing to motivate people in some ways, also to an aspirational goal. And as you talked about our objectives and goal setting a little while ago, it reminded me that a couple of years ago, when we first started working on our website with Visit St. Augustine, and they were kind enough to host it, and I told them, in 10 years I hope that we inspire you to change your name to Visit Compassionate St. Augustine. And that's where people go, and we're a tourist town, and we can have people excited about visiting because of discovering new ways of being compassionate or effective tools that we're using. So anyway, this has been really helpful for me. I want to thank you.
Oh, thank you. You just helped me remember that Mayor Fisher from Louisville talked about the very fact that I think it was Nissan made a decision to build a plant in Louisville because it declared itself to be a compassionate city. And they thought, okay, if it's a compassionate city, then that means it might be a good place for us to put our new plant. And we all know that times change, Louisville has gone through and went through an incredible period because of Breonna Taylor and her murder. But I think that if you really investigate how Compassionate Louisville handled that situation, was so much different than if it was not a compassionate city that really had compassion at the forefront of its thinking, and the way that they interacted with their community. So there's all kinds of good things that happen because of compassion. I'd love to hear from people. We have only a few minutes left, and I know that we've done a lot of talking back and forth, and maybe I did too much talking, but I'd love to know the next steps, because one of the things we said was we would have these 2 sessions and then try and meet individually with people who had ideas, who wanted to meet, and that we would, perhaps Anum and Merida, myself, either one of us or all of us would be able to meet with you and to help forge a plan, which means that, we're willing to do this, but we want to do it with not only you, but a couple other people that might be a part of your team effort. So that's where we are in our thinking. And then as we do that for a couple months, then we'll rethink and maybe have these meetings again and move to the next levels of or phases of creating a compassionate community. So I'd love to hear from Mary and April, Helen, and Francois and Gervin before we close for today. Oh, Merida, go ahead.
No, just briefly, I was wondering whether we could meet in 1 month's time to see what has happened with us, and to know that in 1 month we can come together again as a group. I think it's been very useful for all of us, this conversation, and we can build upon this.
Sure.
Thanks.
I don't know if anyone else wants to say something. April, Helen, go ahead.
I'll introduce myself. Yeah, actually, it's Marilyn, right?
All right, it is.
We have met long ago through Gar Jameson, and I've been following the charter for so many years. And again, thank you for your service. I do have a question. As I wrote in the chat about Newton County, I've had that vision for many years, yet I wonder if the charter can be placed to non-locality communities, like not an actual location.
Can you help me a
Yeah.
little bit more with that?
Well, I see head nods of building out a community, global community is definitely challenging. I had about 3 or 4 years ago started the process, and I still have that long-term vision of doing that, yet it seems like a local community would be easier. Yet I have that curiosity still. Even ours is emergent humanity,
Okay.
and it has a lot of arms, but it doesn't have a location. It's global.
There's an organization called Home for Humanity. I'd love to introduce you to them, and I think it's pretty close to what you're talking about, but it has a real definite focus, and that is to work with this global community where there's safe space for people, compassionate safe space. But I don't know of anything else like you're specifically talking about, but let's have a chat.
Great.
For this could, yeah.
Yeah, I wondered whether, like, the example of the Camino is one of those. It's not really low. It's not only one city, but so we're doing, Bob and I are working on the Camino de la Paz, which is the peace trails kind of between San Antonio and Monterrey. So the idea there is to I suppose we're still forking around to see who's doing what kind of work in different parts of this trail that we envision, and trying to also, we're still at the beginning, so we're trying to see who's doing that work and how we could be supportive of them. And hopefully I envision this kind of like peace hubs that Marilyn just peace spaces. How can we create peace spaces in that? Right.
Or maybe it's a focal issue that you might be concerned with as a global community. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Morgana has a good one there.
Yeah, I was just popped in the chat, answering April. Is it April Helen? Or yeah, your answer, and what we've seen as well is that you have a specific group, in this particular case, women, young ladies. And first, if Francoise is still here, in Cameroon, so we set up, for example, Women for Life in Cameroon, and we're looking at, for example, women's rights, but also menstrual poverty. What we're finding now is that there are certain issues which are so overwhelming. But of course, one of the things that we actually really realize is the fact there is a safe space where the women can come together. And this is really so important, because then you realize when we talk about circles of trust and love, but that's where the real kindness and compassion comes into the whole equation. So I'm sort of looking at the global city where we can all come together and really share our concerns. But at times of need, we're just having this thing at the moment, trying to help all the Afghani ladies in Pakistan. You know, they're refugees, and they're really in imminent danger of being deported back to Afghanistan. So this is when we really have to band together and just look at all the resources that we have. So we, in that sense, we do have this global movement, and there is this underlying, this common denominator of creating safe spaces. So it certainly exists, April.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you all. And, you know, if you want to get in touch and if you want to have an individual meeting, we're really open to that. So thank you for coming today and staying with us the whole time period. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.